We didn't always understand each other, my father and me, but we could agree that where there was an opportunity to do something good.
At 63, Nell Newman finally sits down for an interview Hollywood never thought would happen. Not now, not ever. Her father, Paul Newman, and her mother, Joanne Woodward, were sold to the world as the golden couple, the blueprint of true love, class, and loyalty in an industry known for chaos. For decades, their marriage was treated like a fairy tale that somehow survived fame, temptation, and time. But as Nell adjusts the microphone and takes a slow breath, her tone shifts. She says quietly, almost carefully, "There are things about my family that were never what they appeared to be." Those words hit hard. The room goes silent because everyone understands what that means. Behind every glossy magazine cover, every charity gala, every perfect red carpet smile, there was another story moving in the shadows. And that story had rumors attached to it. Rumors of a quiet apartment in New York. Rumors of private meetings that never made headlines. Rumors of paperwork that was never signed, and conversations that never happened out loud. And then there was one relationship whispered about for years that could have shattered everything if it ever came out back then. Now, for the first time, Paul Newman's daughter breaks her silence, confirming rumors that force people to rethink one of Hollywood's most protected legends. From the outside, the Newman family lived the dream. A beautiful estate in Westport, Connecticut, laughter, success, respect, and that golden glow Hollywood only gives to its favorites. But inside the house, things felt different. The silence hit harder than applause. Nell remembers mornings when her father was just gone. No explanation, no questions asked. No one dared ask where he went. No one dared push her mother. Joanne Woodward kept everything moving, managed her own career, held the family together, and kept the image clean. In public, she was graceful and unshaken. At home, Nell saw the exhaustion in her eyes. For years, Nell thought this was just the price of fame, until one moment flipped everything. In the spring of 1970, while digging through old family photos, Nell found something she was never meant to see. A receipt folded inside a script. It wasn't just paper. It was a lease for a small apartment on 78th Street in Manhattan, registered under a shell company tied to one of Paul Newman's film projects. No one ever talked about it. Not once. But nearly 20 years later, everything shifted. An investigation published by Observer magazine quietly linked that same Manhattan address to several unlisted meetings involving Paul Newman and a small circle of film industry insiders. No press releases, no photos, no public explanation. When reporters reached out to the family for answers, they shut it down fast and declined to comment. For Nell, that silence spoke louder than any denial ever could. To her, it confirmed what she had slowly come to accept. The man the world praised as the perfect husband had lived for decades with one foot planted firmly outside the home. A whole separate world existed, one the family was never invited into. It wasn't treated like a scandal back then. It was treated like something everyone quietly agreed not to see. As Nell started piecing things together, fragments of her father's private life began lining up. She noticed patterns that felt impossible to ignore. Names repeating in personal notes, the same people popping up in travelogues over and over again. Paul Newman had long maintained unusually close relationships with a tight circle of male artists. Among them were screenwriter Gore Vidal and director George Roy Hill. Publicly, they were labeled creative partners, nothing more. Off the record, the bonds ran deeper and more personal. Between 1969 and 1982, Paul took several unannounced trips to New York, Rome, and Stockholm. No family included, no explanations given, and always with at least one member of that inner circle right by his side. Receipts later found in archived belongings raised even more questions. Hotel bookings were listed under initials instead of full names. Handwritten notes read things like, "Dinner with G, same suite." That spelling stayed exactly as written. When journalists pressed Nell about what it meant, she didn't guess or accuse. She simply said, "My father valued privacy more than anyone I've ever known, but he also lived a double rhythm. The public man and the man who wanted to disappear." Then came something even harder to ignore. While reviewing her mother's private documents, Nell uncovered a typed letter stamped clearly across the top. "Private, not for distribution." The document referenced her father's life insurance policy and listed an additional beneficiary, a male name. Not a family member, not someone anyone recognized. No explanation attached, no follow-up notes. No one could officially confirm who the name belonged to, and the paperwork was quietly archived like it never existed. But for Nell, this wasn't nothing. It was another loose thread in a story she could no longer pretend wasn't there. The perfect family portrait was starting to crack, and through those cracks, the truth slowly pushed its way out. Behind the smiles and legacy talk were years of quiet tension, unresolved pain, and legal choices that didn't match the public image. Long before lawyers stepped in and before the foundation took center stage, there was Scott Paul Newman. Scott was Paul Newman's only son, charismatic, talented, and weighed down by a last name that felt impossible to live up to. He grew up in the long shadow of his father's fame. He tried acting, he tried music, he even tried racing. But no matter what he did, the comparisons never stopped. Every move he made came with pressure he didn't ask for. By the late 1970s, that pressure started eating him alive. What began as coping slowly turned into self-destruction. At just 28 years old, Scott died from a drug overdose in Los Angeles. For Nell, that moment shattered something permanently. That's when she realized the public image didn't match the private reality at all. Before he died, Scott told me one sentence I never forgot, Nell recalled. He said, "Dad lives two lives, one for them and one for himself." That quote stayed burned into her memory. After Scott's death, the house changed. The laughter faded. Conversations stopped. The silence became heavy and constant. Years later, that same silence came back again, this time surrounding Paul Newman's will. When Paul passed away in 2008, his estate, valued at hundreds of millions, was almost entirely transferred into his foundation. The family was left with very little control. At first, Nell accepted it, believing it was truly her father's wish. But deep down, questions never stopped forming. But in 2020, new documents surfaced that changed everything again. Paperwork revealed clear inconsistencies between the 2006 draft of Paul Newman's will and the final version signed in 2008. Witness names were different. Key clauses had vanished. Even Paul's signature looked shaky, faint, and uneven, nothing like his earlier handwriting. Court filings later showed that in his final months, Paul was under heavy medication and increasingly dependent on a tight circle of legal advisors and foundation executives. These were people positioned close to him at the end, people who stood to gain influence and control from the changes. Nell couldn't ignore what that suggested. To her, it didn't look like a clean decision made in strength. It looked like a process shaped during vulnerability. Nell and her sisters eventually filed a petition in Connecticut's Superior Court. They claimed manipulation and questioned whether their father had full mental clarity when the final document was signed. The case was dismissed. But for Nell, the fight was never really about money. It was about truth. One son lost to silence, a father's legacy locked behind legal walls, and a daughter still trying to understand what really happened. Then came the turning point. In 2025, the rumors finally collided with confirmation. During an exclusive interview on CBS Sunday Morning, Nell Newman directly addressed the two questions that had followed her family for decades: the will and the whispers. What she shared didn't erase Paul Newman's legacy, but it definitely reshaped how people looked at it. First came the will. According to Nell, the final version signed in July 2008, just 6 weeks before her father's death, looked nothing like the original draft from 2006. The earlier document had been witnessed by Joanne Woodward and two of their daughters. It reflected family involvement and transparency. The final version told a different story. Only one lawyer's name appeared, along with Robert Forrester, who would later become CEO of Newman's own foundation after Paul's death. That detail alone raised serious questions. Questions that had been buried for years, now finally sitting in plain sight. The family later discovered that full control of the multi-million-dollar foundation had been quietly transferred to an external board in 2019. That move caught them completely off guard. According to an investigation by the Wall Street Journal, Robert Forrester had attended at least 4 closed-door meetings with Paul Newman during his cancer treatment. Medical records from that same period noted fluctuating cognition and impaired short-term memory, details that only raised more questions. Nell was careful with her words. "We're not accusing anyone," she said. but the documents suggest my father wasn't fully aware when he signed. That distinction mattered to her. This wasn't about pointing fingers. It was about understanding how power shifted so completely while her father was at his weakest. And that was only the first revelation. Then came the second, the one that stunned even veteran journalists. Nell confirmed that her father, Paul Newman, had maintained a long-term romantic relationship with a man. There was no shock in her voice, no anger, just calm honesty. "It's not a scandal," she said quietly. "It's simply a truth that was never told." The weight of that statement landed hard across the room. Records preserved in the Newman family archive, donated to Yale University in 2017, contained handwritten letters and Polaroid photographs between Newman and Arthur Siegel. Siegel was a photographer and Esquire editor who worked closely with Paul on multiple film campaigns from the 1960s through the 1980s. Their connection wasn't brief, it stretched across decades. The materials were authenticated by experts at the Yale Manuscripts Library. One letter, dated September 12, 1978, read exactly, "You know, I'll never say this to anyone, but you understand when I'm with you I feel freer than I ever did on screen." Those words were left untouched, preserved as written. When asked why the family stayed silent for so long, Nell paused before replying. "Because in his time, even a whisper could destroy a man's entire career," Nell explained. "We knew. We just chose not to let the world weaponize it." That choice wasn't about fear. It was about protection, about survival in an era where truth could be twisted into punishment. The family carried that weight quietly for decades. Within days of the interview airing, major outlets moved fast. Vanity Fair, The Guardian, and Los Angeles Times reopened their archives. Reporters cross-referenced Nell's claims with long-buried materials, dates, letters, and records. One by one, the pieces lined up. The evidence didn't contradict history, it fit into it. As the interview wrapped, Nell leaned forward, her voice steady and controlled. "I'm not defending him, and I'm not condemning him," she said. "I just want people to see him as he truly was. Not a symbol, not a myth, but a human being. Complex, conflicted, and always trying to live by his own truth, even when it came at a cost." Two truths buried for decades were finally out in the open. And with them, the myth of perfection Hollywood had protected for over half a century began to crack, not out of disrespect, but out of honesty. Paul Newman was, and will always be, one of the greatest actors of the 20th century. A man whose blue eyes became an emblem of American cinema, whose voice carried charm, authority, and quiet depth, whose foundation changed millions of lives through real charity and real impact. But as his daughter made clear, legacy is never simple. It's layered, it's human, and sometimes the truth matters more than the legend. Behind the trophies, the philanthropy, and the endless praise, there are still questions hanging in the air, questions time itself hasn't fully answered. Who was Paul Newman when the cameras shut off and the lights went dark? Who was he when the legend faded and only the man remained? And what did it truly cost to carry two lives at once, one for the world and one kept hidden? Was the price paid in silence? In distance? In choices no one was allowed to question? These are the parts of history that don't fit neatly into headlines or highlight reels, and maybe they never will. If you found this story thought-provoking, make sure to like, subscribe, and share this video so more people can hear it. Drop your thoughts in the comments below because this conversation isn't over. This is RumorFame, and we'll see you in the next one.